like to welcome our first panel for today, which will be Strategies for Harnessing AI for Good. We have Johannes Jütting, Executive Head of Paris 21, moderating the panel. And with him today we have Yusuf Murangwa, Director General of the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda, Louis Aranda, who is an economist in the OECD AI Observatory, Krista Baptista, Executive Director of Data 2X, and Aniket Bhusan, who's Lead Analyst and Principal Investigator at Global Affairs Canada.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to this first panel of the second day. I'm very excited that you have come back, that we had already two very inspiring expert talks this morning, and specifically also thanks to Wolfgang for this global overview of what we can do with data and where we stand. I think the objective of this panel is to connect very much to where we left off yesterday. And let me all situate where we stand in this workshop and in this conference. The main title and objective, if you recall, was to speak about data for development and the specific role of AI and how AI can help us as a tool to improve people's life. I mean, yesterday we heard by Gail that, and by many others, AI should be seen as a tool to an end to improve people's life, to achieve the Agenda 2030, to achieve the SDGs. I think we shouldn't forget about this. And while I a lot appreciated the technical part of the conversation, I do hope also today we can touch upon a few things that we touched upon very little yesterday, a little bit at the end, was about the role of other factors than technology, mainly, for instance, institution. It was about issues related to power, which makes the good use of technology at all happen. I think sometimes we tend to see, as data-driven people, we just need to fix the data right, and everything else will fall maniac from heaven, and we just implement it, it's good to go. But we know in reality, development is very messy. There are many, many different factors, institutions, governance, accountability, transparency, that need to be all put in place to make useful use of technology. So let's not forget about this, while it is, I think, very important to speak now about AI. Now, I'm very delighted. We have a wonderful panel here. Everybody brings a different perspective on the topic. And my objective is really to tease out some of the determinants, how we can make AI successful for development. What are the determinants, and can we get to some specific examples that tell us, yes, this is the way to harness AI for the good. That's a little bit the idea for this panel. Let me start with Yusuf, and we played this a little bit up. So we wanted to do a little role play. So Yusuf goes back home from this event, and he's so excited to be Paris 21 chair, and he says, oh, wonderful, 2 days here, and I learned a lot. I'm so convinced I now need I will implement it. I'm convinced. It's done. I mean, I've seen all these presentations. I just want to do an NSDS. He talked about an NSDS 4.0. He wants now to have an NSDS, artificial intelligence augmented something. So for this, he needs money. So he calls his planning minister, his boss, and says, I need an appointment. And now he comes to see, dear deputy minister or minister, I was so happy. I now need the money. So Yusuf, how would you, Monday morning coming back to Kigali, call the minister and say, what would be your arguments to convince him that he should invest in his artificial intelligence for the statistical office and not in another health strategy, not in another digital strategy, not in another educational strategy, but in your artificial intelligence strategy? Because the issue is not so much about relative, it's not about only absolute issues about saying artificial intelligence is nice, but it's compared to other things. It's about prioritization setting. So what would be the arguments, Yusuf, you would tell to me as your minister that makes me believe opening my purse and giving you the money?
Johannes, very easy, very complicated question. If it would be easy just to face the minister and make a case, Minister, I want money, and then you get the money, it would be very good. But from experience, all of us know it's more than that. You don't just show up and then ask for money and then get the money. First of all, you have to make a case for the money. Then you have to get the money. And then you have to get enough money. Because it's complicated. You might ask for the money and not get the money. You might ask for the money, get some money, but not enough money. So how do you ask for money, and get enough money? From experience, I think a number of things have to happen. First of all, you have to make the usual case. You go to the minister, and although Johannes said the minister, but it can be the World Bank. It can be another development partner. It can be anyone who is supposed to give the money. So first of all, you make the first case as usual. We need money. You know, there is very high demand for statistics, and minister or the World Bank, you need the statistics. You need the statistics quickly. If we use AI, maybe you get statistics sooner. It will be more efficient. It will be more accurate. You make the case. This is the standard case. And most of us stop from there. And no wonder we don't get the money. We don't get the money. If you stop from there, you don't get the money because everyone is making that case. The second issue that I think is very important, and it has worked for us, you do something before you ask for the money. Most institutions normally have some money, not enough money, but you can do something. For example, if you had some money and you use AI to do something like the presentation that we just saw, which may not call for a lot of money. And then you go to the minister with a very brilliant example of something that AI can do and that can be scaled up. Then you'll start making sense. So many institutions, many people normally wait to get a lot of money to do something. I don't think we should go that way. We should start using some resources that we have to do things that are useful, that are demonstrable, that are scalable. Then you approach the minister or you approach the World Bank. I think now we can approach the World Bank because we've demonstrated something, and the Vice President, Chief Economist, was pleased yesterday. So it starts making sense if you can demonstrate that something can happen. And that also is not enough. You also have to demonstrate that you can actually do what you say you want to do. And it's a combination of, for example, the small example, scalable, that you demonstrated, and also reputation. So many institutions, so many people think that you just show up, you ask for money, and you don't have the right reputation. I think you also need a good reputation. For example, now if Paris 21 shows up and say, you know, we can do something. Oh, Paris 21, you've done something before, and we can trust you. Then you can get some money. And you have to also demonstrate that you want money now, not like tomorrow. Because if you come to the minister, they'll test you. They say, can you come back tomorrow? And if you come back tomorrow, they say, can you come back next year? And you never get the money. Then it will be 10 years down the road. So it has to be like, we need the money now. You have to show that there is a case for the money now that will pay off. We see that, for example, we saw that during COVID-19. if you package it well and you show what crisis will happen if you don't get the money now, it has to come from like a crisis perspective. If you don't get money now, what won't you get? What crisis will happen? Of course, it's easy to say, but actually doing it is quite challenging. But I think we need to be making a case that we need the money now, if not yesterday. And finally, I think we need to show that we can afford it. You know, many ministers, many institutions think that they can't afford things. Yet in actual sense, they can afford these things. One way of showing that it's affordable is to start with something that is reasonable, that is useful, but also reasonable depending on with the context. If your reasonable is $1 million, then that's okay. If it's $10 million, that's okay. If it's 100,000 US dollars, that's okay, but it has to be reasonable in the context and scalable. And you also have to demonstrate that if you get that money, especially with AI in statistics, you'll gain some efficiencies and you'll save money, and then the money will come back to invest in even more projects. So demonstration of the principle of affordability is very important. Sometimes ministers or institutions refrain from committing because they're not sure they can afford it and they can afford it sustainably. We've seen, for example, in Rwanda with big data and now artificial intelligence, we didn't wait to get a lot of money. You start with a little money, do something, make sense, demonstrate that you can do it, demonstrate that it can be successful, demonstrate efficiencies, and then ask for more money. And then you scale up. You scale up 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, you scale up. So, Johannes, I think approaching the minister asking for money, it's not just asking for money. You have to ask for money and demonstrate the number of issues that I've highlighted. And if you manage to do that successfully, you'll get the money and you'll get enough money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuf. And you would have convinced me as you're planning, as your minister. Let me just ask a quick follow-up question. I mean, as a minister, I like specifically the word you used, efficiency. I like efficiency because that means, in my words, cost cutting, getting leaner, more productive. That's what I like. Now you go back home to I give you the money and you go back to your statistical office and you make the same discourse. You are so excited. And then you look in the face of your colleagues and half of them, they don't look so excited because they understand by efficiency basically job cuts. And we have heard this when we were at the UNSC, that some of the statistical offices using more AI, of course, it will make a huge change management necessary. So could you just say a few words about the question about harnessing AI for the public good, for producing out more data for sustainable development, will also mean very concretely change management, challenges in change management of organizations. Could you just share 1 or 2 thoughts about that? How would you go about that?
That is true. Money alone will not solve the institutional issues around AI. And if you have the money, even before you have the money, you have to think through the change management process. And 2 things are involved: is the people and the processes. People, processes, and money, resources. And if you have the money, then the people. The people in the institution and in the broader ecosystem need to be aligned. In this case, it's not only the statistics offices. You need the statistics offices. You need the ministries of information and communication technology. You need other agencies because you'll start doing these things and you'll have issues with confidentiality issues, with data protection agencies and so many other agencies. You'll get resistance from regulators in financial sector, utilities, you'll get resistance. So you need to manage the people in terms of their concerns. If the concerns are internal, maybe they are worried they'll be laid off. So you have to accompany that with reskilling and repositioning of the human resources and so on and so forth. And you also have to align processes. It takes time to align processes to new requirements. So sometimes you'll have money and you think you just throw the money and get the processes done. It won't work. So you need to think it through very well in terms of human resources and the processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was really very interesting. Now, I would like to move the conversation a little bit. We have been talking about development at large, about SDGs, about better lives. One key issue that we are all interested in is improving gender equality. And this is really very, very important. We had a very good discussion at the United Nations Statistical Commission. I think it was an event organized by our colleagues, UN Women, about AI and possible impact. But I think from a perspective, from a gender policy perspective, generally speaking, we have Krista with us, who is a distinguished expert on this topic. Just very generally speaking, how do you see AI can help us with improved gender equality?
Thanks so much, Johannes, for the kind introduction. For those of you that don't know Data2X, we are a nonprofit organization, a civil society group, and we operate at this intersection of gender data and data innovation and gender equality. And we work with many of you in this room. We work significantly in collaboration and in coordination to unite a broad spectrum of stakeholders, from UN agencies to governments. And our goal is really to inform policies and strategies driving meaningful improvements in gender equality. We work across the data value chain, so looking at ways that data can be collected, produced, analyzed, and then used for policy change over time. And we work, again, at this global level, but also at the national level. We work with country governments. We work with, through our Gender Data Network in partnership with Paris 21, Open Data Watch, and UN regional offices, to work with gender data champions within government and national statistics offices, and a whole range of other stakeholders. I also personally have been working in the information communications technology and data space for the last 20 years in global development. And so I have been thinking a lot about artificial intelligence, and really so thankful to be here and to hear all the conversations that we've been a part of the last couple of days. And one kind of reflection on that, I think, for those of you that follow Gartner's, the Gartner Group's analysis of technology innovation, when it comes to artificial intelligence and all the ways that we've talked about it, the different methods and means, we're really at the peak of the hype cycle, which is partly why we're all here and so engaged. But I think what that also means for us is that there's a risk that we don't really know what's on the other side, right? And there's both opportunities and challenges ahead of us. And so I'm again, really happy to be part of this. From the gender equality lens, there are definitely challenges that we're going into this conversation with. So the first is that gender data is incredibly complex. It covers not just the actual disaggregation of data, but also intersectional components and elements, as well as, really the ways that women's and girls' lives are impacted every day. And we know from Data2X's research, our partner research, that there's already a gap going into this process, and that has come up a little bit in the last couple of days. And so we're starting from behind, so to speak. And so that's something we just have to be really hyper aware of. And the second component is that we also know that funding for gender data is insufficient to fill the current gender data gaps and to understand how we're going to meet the SDGs. And so because of that, I think we are very interested at Data2X and with partners to identify key strategies that we can deploy now in order to get ahead of what's coming in terms of AI. And I think it's quite urgent. So, and I'll come back to that. We've seen some examples of success. We've, particularly in women's health, around image classification of health risks and that has been happening in the last several years. There's a lot of lessons there. Predictive analytics around gender-based violence online, women's financial inclusion, product development and use. So we can see that there's some use cases that we can build on. And I think that's a great starting point. What I would say in terms of strategies is that we have to start incorporating better gender-based data in training models, and have women at the table. This came up a couple of times yesterday, but if women and other underrepresented groups are not at the table, both in the design of these systems, the collection of data, the development of training models, and then the follow-up. So what are the mitigation methods that we can incorporate into a model's creation? And how can we incorporate regular human audits into the system? Some creative funding that I've seen are partnerships that look at not just the creation of new products and tools, but also the monitoring of the outcomes and the outputs. And so I think that's a good method for us to track. The second strategy would be around some of the StatGPT and some of the other models that came up. These are closed-loop AI models where we can have our arms around the data that's going into the model and use this for decision-making so that we can understand and draw solutions and outputs from, again, a controlled set of data and or documents. This is something that we've developed at Data2X that looks at our all the research that is on our website, for example. And so this could easily be expanded, and I think it's within reach of many of our organizations to develop these types of tools and share what we're learning. The third thing I want to raise is around data agency models. So again, coming back to this idea of having women and underrepresented groups as part of this process, there's really good examples of data collaboratives where different stakeholders, private sector, government, CSOs, come together to look at really complex development problems. For example, where to locate care centers to give increased access to women while they work that are located along transportation routes. And there's a lot of, I think, good use cases out there that we can draw on, as well as data cooperatives. So where can we look at the remuneration models around data and push for change, push for kind of those use cases and models? And then lastly, getting tactical around data governance. So we've, I think, raised a lot of the really most important points around the importance of partnerships, the importance of understanding where to interrogate the models and where to monitor and where to be part of the design process. But this is where I feel the most urgency, because I think we're really at a precipice where we can either perpetuate the inequalities that we've been working to solve, particularly around gender and underrepresented groups, and we can and should use all the tools at our disposal to create the inclusive, positive outcomes that we want, that reflect the values that we want to see and the trajectories of growth and livable planet that we have been talking about and that we just heard about. And what this, I think, means, again, is coming back to the tactics. And I love that process has already come up, because I think the technology is here. It's going to be part of our lives. And so using both implementation and process approaches to tackle that is really going to be important.
Thank you very much. I think these were very concrete and concise examples how we can use AI to improve gender equality. Just a quick follow-up question. How is your feeling about the beneficial for the opportunities for the global south, for the so-called developing countries, specifically for improving gender equality? If we take any global indicator from the World Economic Forum, from the OECD, from the UN, if we look at composite indices in terms of gender equality, you will see it's very clearly related to income. High income countries, in generally speaking, better gender equality on average, while for the poor countries, huge challenges, which are often related to so-called social institutions, deeply rooted norms that are very, very hard to change. Would you say that there is an opportunity, even using artificial intelligence, to challenge some of those deeply rooted discrimination against women? Inheritance rights, access to, behavioral issues, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in a couple of ways. So, one is thinking about, again, this idea of people, process, technology. So understanding where AI fits in and can be leveraged and really used to amplify our understanding of what's happening on the ground, but also can be used to tell the stories and to influence real change. But that's going to take time, right? Societal norms and the social context in which gender equality persists is it's not going to be solved by AI. So just to be clear, but I think AI can be a real important tool and an important way for us to, again, understand the data, to even potentially explore ways to model the data gaps and kind of showcase the economic, the societal, the climate impact of gender inequalities over time. The question kind of, behind what you're asking as well, though, is funding and resources, and how do we make sure that we prioritize this appropriately across the range of development challenges? I guess I do also just come back to the fact, though, that this is here. It's a tool that's, and I see it as a tool that we should be using whenever we can to affect, the change and kind of influence where AI for good goes. Because again, I think we're at this moment where there's an openness, there's a dialogue, and I think we can lean in even more and say, this is what you should be considering, developers of large, big tech, tools. And these are the ways that we can all be deploying kind of smaller, bespoke AI tools and systems in our own organizations.
Great, thank you very much. So we heard the topic again is harnessing AI policies for the public good. We heard a perspective from a National Statistical Office. We just had a very interesting perspective on a very concrete policy question, gender equality. Let me zoom out a little bit and bring in the perspective of a very important country, Canada. We have a representative with Aniket here from the government of Canada, from Global Affairs Canada. Canada is a leading country, I think we can say, engaging in AI. There is the G7, there is G20, there is the UN, there's many different international initiatives I know Canada is engaged in. It's a very important country. It's an important topic for your country, Aniket. So if you could kindly give us a little perspective from the government of Canada for harnessing AI for the public good.
Thank you. First of all, Johannes, good morning, everyone. And I would just start with a little bit of humility more than anything else. This is a very broad area. That's a broad question. It's a well-intended question. So I will speak to the best I can. I'm very tempted to throw my script away here and build on what Yusuf and others have already spoken. But I'll take at least to start, the more cautious approach. And I think that's important because you will get different answers depending upon who you speak to and what vantage point you start with. So I should preface that by saying I'm at Global Affairs Canada. I work in the multilateral branch. We are a team that focuses on economic development. I work on the governance side, so inclusive governance. And so we're very seized on questions of gender data, gender equality. We've worked with many of the partners in this room, including yourselves, Paris 21, UN Women, and several others. Let me take a sort of two-part approach, if I may. Start with what we call the GOC, the Government of Canada level, and then go to the Global Affairs Canada level specifically. So to your point, very well taken, perceived as a leader. What we find ourselves as is similar to that. In many instances, we find Canada as an early mover. I wouldn't say a first mover necessarily, but an early mover in many cases on the policy and the regulatory front. Whereas in other areas, I would say we are moving with a lot of caution and a lot of learning from experimentation, including real-world experimentation. So I would highlight a lot of the roots of where policy on AI and responsible use and harnessing AI for good is stemming from the work on digital. There's a lot of work that took place on digital. I'd highlight specifically the 2022 Digital Ambition report and strategy from the government, and also the 2023 to 2026 data strategy of the government of Canada. 4 key lessons from this, I think that are somewhat applicable to a lot of the conversations we've been having. First, a lot of this is informed by the pandemic experience. What the pandemic experience showed is really a reassessment and a reimagined understanding of the strategic asset value of data. Second, the need to limit collection and focus on the minimum that's necessary. Third, the need to have real key safeguards around retention of information for minimum periods. And fourth, the importance of transparency. So I think these are sort of 4 lessons from the digital side, which are very applicable to all of what we're talking about on the AI side. Let me move to the AI side. On the AI side, at the outset, and this is the key point I want to drive home if I can, the realization has been one of we need to be purposive and intentional about the representation of our core values in whatever the policy frame is that takes forward. So what do I mean by that? I mean ensuring coherence and consistency with the public service accessibility standards and approach. I mean links of the development of the AI strategy with the ongoing work on the anti-racism strategy, which is a Government of Canada-wide initiative. And these have helped inform where we are on responsible AI. So we are following these 12 principles, which align very much, I think, with the OECD principles on AI. They also align with the Digital Nations shared approach on AI. These are widely available. And I just point to a few really practical tools and practical areas. One is a set of operational guidance tools on the use of generative AI. This is an evergreen set of documents, which the last I saw had an update just in February 2024, which speaks to the need to keep up with the trends and the pace of development. But it builds out of a working paper, which was an open collaborative working paper, which was started in 2016, 2017. So it kind of gives you a sense of how this has incrementally evolved. The second I would highlight is the directive on automated decision-making, which was launched in 2019, but again, is an evergreen set of tools, which was last updated in 2023 to reflect, amongst other things, GBA+, the importance of gender-based analysis, which is a cross-cutting of importance to Canada. And the final one I'll update is the AIA, which the government is quite proud of, which is the algorithmic impact assessment. Again, a very robust framework and a guidance to designers and developers of AI models on the responsible and ethical use of AI, at the inception, at the outset. These are then backed by also tools which use the procurement heft of the government, if you will. So the Public Service, PSPC, Public Service Canada, maintains a transparent list of approved AI suppliers. You only get on that list if you accord by these standards. So these are some of the ways that at the Government of Canada level, at the broad level, we're taking, again, in some ways, an early mover advantage, because a lot of the AI innovation at the academic level has taken place in Canada. We know Vector Institute and Mila and several others. But in other areas, proceeding with a lot of caution, and maybe in another round, I'll get to the global affairs specific.
I think that would be interesting. I mean, this is... It's a plea for a rather short answer, but I think it's for this conversation. I think it was very useful to put the broad perspective from a government and where you come from, and the link to very established norms, values, the Canadian treaties, I mean, from your government, digital context and so on and so forth. If you could just say for the development purpose, because I'm still struggling a little bit in relative terms. I mean, if I'm a development minister in Canada and I'm all in favor of artificial intelligence, I still need to make, I mean, there's so much pressure on aid budget these days. Is it for me useful now to invest in AI systems for developing countries? The aid, should it shift more towards AI? So I have to take it somewhere away from. So it's all a question about relative terms. Is that something, I know you are not necessarily fully what I understood in authorized maybe to speak about the whole thing, but from your perspective, that would be really interesting, seeing AI in a development policy context of Canada. If you could just say a few words.
Yeah, sure. I'll speak to the GAC context writ large. So Global Affairs Canada is an integrated department, all three main functions. So the foreign affairs function, the consular function, and diplomacy function, trade as well as development. So not only development. And to your question, just at the outset, not a question of whether I'm authorized or not. It's just those are not my decisions to make. I'm very glad that those are not my decisions to make, and therefore don't really have a position to sort of opine on that specifically. But I do think that more from a sort of information sharing perspective, because we have many partners in the room that we work with and may work with in the future, I think it's important to sort of point to what they can look at to see where we're at. And I would specify two anchor initiatives, so two anchor areas. There is a fair bit out in the public domain on these, but there's much more behind the scenes, and of course, I'm available to discuss further. The first is the future of diplomacy, and in both of these AI and these questions that you're raising pervade. So first is the future of diplomacy initiative, and the second is much more operational, which is the grants and contributions transformation initiative. In both of these areas, we are being guided by sort of three parallel work streams which are underway. One is on the policy level, which is on the responsible ethical adoption of AI within global affairs programming, including development programming. Second is on the capability level. This is around the augmentation of analytics, including internal analytics. What are we learning about what we're funding? And the third is about enablement. So that's even more internal, AI-enabled business solutions and AI-enabled workforce and so forth. One of the key points that I think is worth sharing with you is that we know that AI, generative AI specifically, is already changing how partners approach and engage with us. So the response function to that folks should be aware of is that we also are seized with the need to update how we engage with partners. And a key piece of that change, I think, will be, and this is a little off script, this is my view, will be our expectations of partners. So what do we expect partners to have in place for levels of engagement that we may have with them? So we may have had policies around data access and privacy when data is collected within projects, but now we may also look to see how AI is used by a partner, where it is used, what sort of a drop test function a partner undergoes before they embed AI into their programming. So a lot of moving parts here with very definite impact on all three streams of global affairs.
Thank you very much, Aniket. That's very insightful. Now, I would like us to think a little bit more about, maybe because we took this term, good harnessing AI policies, but in reality, what is an AI policy? I mean, we know what national strategies for the development of statistics are. We have some ideas what is in this. But I think we need to unpack a bit more AI policy, good AI policies. What do we know? What works? What doesn't work? And who is better placed than Luis from the OECD? The OECD is well known for collecting a lot of data, a lot of evidence, and then They are very good in terms of putting it in some nice space and seeing what works and maybe what works less so. So, Luis, very happy to have you on the panel, and please feel free to share some of your thoughts on this important topic of AI policies.
Thank you, Johannes, and it's my pleasure to be here. I was telling you last night how I'm very surprised how you managed to bring together so many communities for this event. So you have the national statistics community, you have the data governance community, the AI policy governance community, and the development community. Most of these communities don't usually speak to one another in reality. So it's nice to have them all here, but that also means that we all have different starting points, and that's, I think, what you were mentioning. I come from the AI governance community. I've been working on AI governance at the OECD for the past 6 or 7 years. So I would like to take a step back today and sort of share with you what we've seen in this past years in terms of AI governance, but from the country level perspective. And what we've seen is that most countries, what they do for AI governance is they set up a national AI strategy. What is a national AI strategy? You just mentioned it, but a national AI strategy, now this is not the only way, of course, but this is what this is one of the trends we're seeing. A national AI strategy is where countries, they set up their objectives for AI, but not only their objectives, they also come up with a plan to implement those objectives and to execute that plan. So they set up the budget, they set up a coordination mechanism. Who's going to coordinate this across government? Is it a new ministry? Is it going to be in the Prime Minister's office? So it's a high-level plan that makes AI a priority for that country. Now we have, historically, we've seen one of the first movers, and we just heard it, was Canada in 2017 with their national AI strategy, followed very closely by Japan. And then right after, we just started to see an explosion of AI policies and strategies. We're tracking them on OECD.ai. You can access this database for free at OECD.ai, and we have over, I think, 70 countries with national AI strategies and policies. And we discussed, so for instance, yesterday, the chief economist at the World Bank, he said, well, maybe we need to invest in data in different languages because it's not available, it's mainly available for English, and if we're gonna reap the benefits of AI in our countries, we need it to be available in our languages. So maybe this is one of the objectives that a country should have in their national AI strategy. We also heard a lot about including people in AI governance. If they're not at the table, how did it go? If they're not at the table, they're on the menu. We don't want people to be on the menu. We don't want women to be on the menu. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how countries have included people when they set up their AI national strategies. One of them is Chile 4 years ago. They did a broad consultation process to design and develop their national AI strategy, which was very successful. And the other example is Costa Rica, who's doing that public consultation as we speak. So again, national AI policies, they're a good way to set objectives, to coordinate, but also to include people in the process. But we also see a lot of challenges because it is one thing to come up with a plan and with objectives, but how do you make it happen? How do you implement it? And this is a big challenge, not only for emerging economies, but also for developed countries. How can they implement AI strategies? Now, there are many ways of doing so, but we've seen that it's very challenging, especially for countries where political cycles are short-lived, where political continuity is not the rule. I'll give you an example, maybe a good example and a bad example. I'll start with the bad one. I'm from Mexico. In Mexico, we had a national AI strategy in 2018. I think it was one of the first 10 countries to have a national AI strategy. But in 2018, the government changed, and that was all scrapped. And we still don't have one. The good example, Egypt, 2019, national AI strategy. They implemented it. It's been 5 years. Now at the 5th year, they called us at the OECD. They said, we need a review. We need you to come and tell us, evaluate our strategy, our implementation, let us know how we're doing, but also how we can improve. You know, so AI strategies, it's important to implement them because you need to improve them in time. And so we need to evaluate them and implement them. And then I'm just going to end with maybe a little provocation for all countries, but maybe more for emerging economies. We usually hear, I mean, we all know that they have different challenges, and they have very, very important challenges like corruption, poverty, and other challenges. And AI may not be their main priority. And let's be honest about this is understandable. And one of the things we're hearing a lot nowadays is that I need to focus on connectivity first, and then I'll focus on AI. I need to focus on privacy first, data governance laws, and then maybe I'll make AI a priority. And maybe we need to rethink this paradigm. And I think Wolfgang made a similar point just earlier about, you know, false dichotomies between growth and sustainable development or climate. Well, AI, connectivity, privacy, they come in bundles. And it's okay to try to tackle them in parallel. It's like, I'll give you maybe a silly example, but for those of you who have a partner or are married, when you make your bed, you're not just going to make one side of the bed. That's going to piss the other. It's going to look messy, right? And it's not. We have to think about this more or less the same way. So is this idealistic? Maybe, but Gail Smith yesterday said idealism is good. And guess what? From the survey yesterday, we know that 90% of us here in this room are optimistic about this technology and its benefits. So let's try to tackle all these challenges together. AI strategies are a good way to get started for countries and to put these priorities at the highest country level, and of course reap the benefits while manage the risks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have one small follow-up question. I know we are running a little bit out of time, but it's so interesting. So I also wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask one or two questions. So if you have a question, could you just maybe go to the mic while I ask the question for Luis so we don't lose too much time. So if you have a question, think about it and be ready just in a minute. Luis, that's all very interesting. And of course, we are all working in our sectors, silos, whatnot. I mean, you are now a great fan of AI policies. Aniket just reminded us that the history of AI policies, the roots are in digital policies. And I would say, even digital, I like data. So you have a data strategy, you have a digital strategy, you have an AI strategy, and you live in Mali with a very few people working in the government and have to handle all these different sort of frameworks, plans, and we also have a national data strategy. How do I manage? I mean, how this is connected? Are you guys linking up these AI strategies and policies with the digital ones? How do you ensure that you are not creating yet another level of bureaucracy and sort of in the administration, which is completely, as you were saying, there may be a good argument, not only political, why Mexico was giving up, because they had too many other things to do than just thinking about the AI one. So how do you ensure, and what are the maybe ways that we can help in particular countries that have not a fully Weberian bureaucracy in place, that are just at the beginning, that they can manage as well? Small question, I know.
Yeah, just a very small question. I think I don't have a complete answer to your question, but I do think coordination and direction at a high level of government is important for all these things. If it's a priority for the government, for the central government, for the federal government, then we need to ensure that there's coordination to make it happen among all these policy areas. So coordination is very important. And then one of the temptations that I think emerging economies fall into is trying to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes what we need to do is look around and look for good practices, and we've become allergic to the term best practices because there are no best practices. Everything depends on the context. So looking at good practices from other countries, I think is very, very important for emerging economies. And then they can take and adapt to their specific context. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel every time. So I'll just give you that short answer now, and maybe we have time for...
We have time for... Thank you very much. I see we have 3 people who want to ask a question. Please go. So you have to be very short and concise. You shoot one after the other, and then the panel can select. We will manage somehow. But please go. Peter, you don't need to introduce yourself because you did it yesterday a couple of times.
Okay, great.
So go.
I don't know how I'll do this. Okay, let me go this way. Thanks a lot for everything. So let me try and keep it short. I'm quite passionate on, how we can empower women. That's one of the things I'm so passionate. I have a mother, I have a kid, and all those stuff. So gender-based violence is extremely an issue worldwide, and also especially in Africa. And leveraging AI is pretty very important, right? So I'm just wondering what Data2X is working. I know you worked with GovLab on the, 100 Questions Initiative, if I'm not mistaken, on key questions in which we can leverage data and AI to be able to address this. So I want to know whether progress has been done in this direction. And the last one, which is also on gender, is that the informal economy is actually, when we look at Africa, close to 80% is women, right? Meaning that they don't have access to pensions when they are old and all those stuff. So I'm wondering what you're doing with governments in line with this direction as we leverage on AI and data. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next one, please introduce yourself.
I'm Joshua Park from George Mason University. I'm initially from South Korea. I'm professional research of international security issues. And thank you for hosting this wonderful seminar. Then my question is simple, one question. When it comes to AI, I'm thinking of nuclear weapon, nuclear energy, which is double-edged technology for human beings. My question is, do you believe that AI which has potential equivalent with nuclear weapon and nuclear energy for human beings? Thank you.
Thank you. Next one.
Thank you. My name is Dunstan Mategenya. I'm a data scientist within DECDG. I have 2-part questions. I think one is kind of comment. So I do agree that I think in any national AI strategy, we need to include a data strategy. But one thing I wanted to say is I think within this room and over the past couple of decades, we have a lot of experience in collecting quantitative data or statistical data, right? So in AI now, especially generative AI, the bedrock is large language models. And so the missing data there is language data. And so in the countries where we work, especially at the bank, low-income countries, most of these languages are what are called low-resource languages. And they are low-resource because there is no data on the internet for these languages. So I think what I wanted to ask first as a question is, especially for Louis, for these national AI policies or data strategies, do you have or have you seen countries which have successfully, especially for low resource, right, who have successfully established some type of framework for collecting this type of language data, which is very, very different from statistical data, right, or from quantitative data? That's kind of the first question. Second, of course, it's a comment that for us to kind of collect this type of language data, we do not have to reinvent the wheel. I think as people in statistics and data, we can use some of the same tools to kind of help to collect this language data, which in most cases, of course, is fragmented. It's sitting in different places in the governments. So setting up something like a national language, a national data infrastructure for language, right? Like we did with national spatial data infrastructure. So using that similar reasoning can help us to kind of speed up the process of collecting language data for building large language models in all source settings.
Excellent question. I think you take note, right? That was for Luis. Yeah, Jessa?
Yes, Jessa from UN Women. I have 2 points. First, in terms of harnessing AI for good of all, and obviously I will speak about women and girls. It's more of just looking at beyond sex disaggregated data, as you have rightfully pointed out. How can we leverage this in terms of addressing intersectionality with other inequalities? And I look to Yusuf particularly, and likewise to Johannes in terms of the partnership on how we can further leverage AI in terms of focusing on supplementing what has been done from the foundational, and how we can leverage AI to make sure that we have data that would address really data for all, particularly, of course, women and girls and the intersecting inequalities it has. Now, my second point would be in terms of the data governance and how it can be more gender sensitive. My specific question would be how this conversation that we are having somehow influences that conversation on the broader conversation on Global Digital Compact. We as UN Women is basically pushing for a gender transformative, Global Digital Compact. And we say this in the context that the advancement of women, that it will prioritize the advancement of women and girls. We hear discussions of women having seat at the table, making sure that they are able to make decisions that impacts their lives in this digital world, and that they live a life free of violence online or offline. So I think as we talk about AI policies, AI strategies, we as a group or we as a partnership, how are we influencing that global discussions that is happening in the summit, or hopefully will be adopted in the summit of the future this September?
Thank you. Last one.
Well, thank you. Super specific question, Fabricio Rodriguez from the Inter-American Development Bank. We have mentioned the importance for governments to produce a legal framework to control the development and use of artificial intelligence, but I think we haven't mentioned the potential that the AI has for governments per se as a tool that could improve the way governments are managing their decisions, are producing their policies, and perhaps the importance of this tool for changing how governments interact with citizens, protecting or even enhancing democracies around the world. So I would like to know your perspectives around AI as a tool for better governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very important question. So my suggestion to my dear panelists is as follows. We go the reverse order. So Luis, get ready. And you have 1 minute roughly. Don't go through all the questions because we had gender, nuclear, language models, the legal frameworks, the public service. Luis, we don't want you to answer all these points. If you can just pick the one that you feel most comfortable with. And then we continue the conversation. This is an opening. We have coffee. We have still some food, and we continue. So, Luis, in a minute, you pick and go.
Can I pick 2?
You can pick 2. 30 seconds for each.
Okay, the question about nuclear, the similarities with nuclear, I think, fair enough. That's an analogy that's been coming up recently by some community in the AI governance field. The catastrophic risks of AI. And that's fair. What I would encourage all of us is to not lose sight of the risks that we have today from AI and the opportunities that AI is bringing today, because we're thinking 10, 20, 30 years ahead. Now, we can do both. We don't have to choose one or the other, but yes, there can be risks like any other technology. But let's also take care of the risks today, like privacy, bias, and other things. And the second one, the language data, very good point. You asked for examples. Spain just came out with a national strategy to develop a large language model in Spanish, which would be useful not only for Spain, but also Latin America and all the other Spanish-speaking countries. And the same we are seeing in Israel. So those are two examples. Israel is doing the same for Arabic languages, so that will be useful and I'm happy to get into details later, so I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for the questions.
Thank you very much, Luis. Next is Aniket.
Sorry, I forgot the order there. So let me just pick up on a couple of things. Gender, AI, gender data, and AI. I think it's a good opportunity for me to point to some of the work of IDRC, for those who are not familiar, the International Development Research Center. And I'll, in particular, refer to the FAIR network. So this is the Feminist AI Research Network, and a couple of very interesting projects, AI projects within that. So FAIR is a global network of scientists, economists, and activists dedicated to making AI more effective, inclusive, and transformational, and embedded in feminist principles. I would, in particular, highlight a project. I may be mispronouncing this, but Ayur AI. It's a leveraging case data in Argentina to close gaps in GBV, in gender-based violence data. So that's an interesting project. Save Her in Manila is another interesting one. I have more details on that for anybody who's interested. Just quickly, someone mentioned about GDC and women and girls. So Friday, we'll see what comes out. You know, negotiations and discussions are ongoing. I think there's one interesting point here on what is the right fora for what forms of discussion. So is it the Global Digital Compact and on what? Is it the Commission on the Status of Women, and does that need to go more in the digital direction? And I think these are some tensions that you know, we're noticing. And finally, on AI as a tool for governance, I think much of what I discussed hopefully came across as very much the approach is AI as an enabler of better public service delivery, AI as an enabler of better decision-making, more transparent decision-making. That's the approach that we're taking in much of what I discussed. But to point to a couple of specific things. One, the guidelines on automated decision-making. I think they're a really good example of what, as an early mover, Canada is doing to be clear and transparent, where automated tools are used, where they're not, where they should be and where they shouldn't be, you know, clear no-goes, for example. And then the other is in our own work in global affairs, how AI will inform how we assess partnerships and how we are learning about what works and what doesn't work. What's the impact of our various lines of investment? So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Aniket. Krista?
All right, thanks. A couple of points, and then I'm happy to follow up at the break on sort of some of Data2X's specific work. But we do work in coalition with others, and I just want to make the point that I think, you know, increasing our progress towards gender equality using gender data is not going to happen with any one organization, and it's something that we're going to do collectively, and that we work on every day. Second point, I think, is that coming back to this idea that gender data and gender equality is a complex issue. I think that political will is often an important aspect that we haven't talked that much about, but I think it's really critical with gender data, and it's really critical with AI and the use of AI. I'm excited that you brought up feminist AI. I was going to mention that as well, that I think there is a feminist AI movement that needs to be amplified and considered and part of the conversation. And then looking at the ways that continuing to interrogate how data is being used and what those gaps are is really going to be critical. And then the last thing is a reflection on thinking about the use of AI in the ecosystem that it exists in. So some of the comments that have come up around digital public infrastructure, the policy, the human resources. So that whole kind of ecosystem in which AI sits, we need that all kind of needs to be part of the conversation and needs to be fed into these broader kind of UN frameworks. So how do we make sure that we're being intentional about that? I think it's going to be really critical, and that there's women in those conversations is a kind of it's so easy. We can do that.
Great. Last but not least, Yusuf.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very brief. I'll go back to gender analysis. I think AI will help us to go beyond the normal sex disaggregation. And there's a lot of potential for even other marginalized or disadvantaged groups. We'll be able to see more insights, different insights from data with the use of AI. So I see a lot of potential with AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have really to come to an end. I'm just looking at my phone. There are questions from the audience, from the online audience. It's actually quite engaging.